Welcome to Dr. B Music Theory. Before we get started for this tutorial video, I'd like to ask you all to do me a favor. I've been involved with a sabbatical, meaning I have a year off from teaching at the college I normally teach at to do research and put on performances for my sabbatical project, Music of the Gilded Age in the Hudson Valley. Now, I've got another YouTube channel that's dedicated just to that. I've got a couple short video trailers and teasers. I'm making some documentaries. You all could do me a real great favor by going to that page and subscribing. I don't get to make a custom URL until I have enough people who've subscribed. So hopefully if you're interested in how I personally apply all this music theory knowledge, because I'm making arrangements for this project and I'm performing and I'm using that information to help inform my performance. If you're interested in seeing that, please follow along. I'd love to have you. But even if you're not interested and you just want to do music theory for yourself, do me a favor, just subscribe anyways, so that I can get enough subscribers so that I can get that custom URL. That would be really awesome. So what we're going to talk about today is going to be lesson 49, and this is a video that I'm making exclusively for my Patreon supporters. Now what I'm going to do for everyone is share the first part of this video that gives you the basics, but then I'm going to go into further depth with more examples, and that's going to be available just on Patreon. So if you're interested in getting more of this great information, and I'm putting up homework examples and things that you can kind of like test yourself on, please support me on Patreon. It helps me make the time so I can make these awesome videos and share them with all of you. So, lesson 49, here we go. We're talking beyond the basics. That's what I'm calling it, because everything up till now, lesson 1 through 48, is all pretty standard, traditional, tonal harmony. And that's like a key word I want you to, tonal harmony. This is what we're talking about. So harmony is really the study of how pitches interact simultaneously. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking harmony, simultaneously sounded pitches and those relationships. And then the tonal aspect is how those simultaneously sounded pitches relate as one group to another group to another group into an overall larger picture. So we've covered the basics, so harmonic progression, voice leading, non-chord tones, modulation, some of the more basic chromatic harmonies like augmented sixth chords, Neapolitan, secondary functions. We've covered all of that. But the beauty of tonal harmony is that it's almost limitless what is possible. Now, at certain points in history, people have thought otherwise. People would get to hear what Richard Wagner was doing with the chromaticism that he was using and say to themselves, there's nothing more that can be done. And before him, Beethoven made such a huge impact that people were really hesitant to write music, especially symphonies, because they thought Beethoven had kind of done it all and they didn't want to be compared as insufficient in terms of their innovation and what they brought to the table. But people wrote symphonies after Beethoven that were amazing. So it was possible. And people wrote harmonically after Wagner, and it was amazing. So people like Debussy came up with another kind of approach to harmony, and it's essentially tonal in its context. So there's still opportunities. If we listen to popular music, we're hearing use of harmonies in essentially tonal settings that are still a little bit different than what's come before. So there's still room for more innovation. It's a really rich palette to experiment with. So let's talk about one element that could be different. We're talking about the 5 or the 5/7 chord, so in other words, the dominant. And with the 6 of the chord we're referring to, so 6 of the chord substituted for the 5th of the chord. Now we know that the 5th is the easiest tone to leave out or omit. So this happens a lot in tonal music, where we might have root, 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 third, 3 roots and a third, especially at cadences. this is not uncommon, and if we're writing in 3-part harmony, you can still leave that fifth out. Why can you leave the fifth out? This I've covered in previous lessons, but let me just summarize. The fifth is implied. The human ear almost basically supplies it on its own because of the way the overtone series works. The fifth is the first new pitch in the overtone series other than the fundamental. So because it's so basic in the way sound works, our ear naturally assumes a perfect fifth. So leaving it out, something that we have a lot of experience with already. So what we do is we leave out the fifth in a 5 chord and instead put in the 6. And this could be for a dominant 5 major triad or major minor 7 chord. Now, how do we do it to make sure it sounds good? There are a few more guidelines and rules that we can gather when we look at the literature. People like Haydn did this, people like Robert Schumann did this, and we're going to look at some of those examples to see exactly how. Let's go over the basics. First off, it must be in root position. That's what the literature shows us. Having that in root position. And why? Because that's what we want, right? That implication of the fifth. If we have this fundamental, a C, the next overtone is a C in an octave, and after that is the fifth. So if we don't have it in root position, we don't get that implied fifth. So I think that is probably the primary reason why we find this type of 5 chord used in root position only. The next thing is to talk about how we get in, how we prepare and resolve that. And to do that, I'd like to first take a look at these examples here at the bottom. So, in our first example, let's just first listen and then analyze. We have all right, so that sounds very much like we are in F major. So we indicate that with an uppercase F colon. We indicate our key signature. Our first chord is a 2 chord in first inversion. And again, I always recommend, if you want to get a little bit more practice, pause the video, try to analyze this before I do, and then just restart to see if you got it correct. So 2-6, which is, we have essentially a G minor triad with B flat in the bass, going to a C major triad, which is our 5 chord, going to a 1 chord. And in this case, we have root, 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 third, like I was just talking about, tripled root and a third. Very common for voice leading, smooth voice leading, sounds great. Our ears hearing that implied fifth. Now, as we analyze this, it definitely isn't doing our beyond the basics. This is our kind of like our step 1 to show you how we get there. So 2-6-5-1, we've heard this before. Hopefully we all understand it, how it works. Let's hear it again. Let's move on to our next example, which starts off the same. And we'll analyze this. We start with the 2-6 chord again. We go to a 5 chord, but here we have this A. And this A is not in our 5 chord. Our 5 chord typically, our C major triad, is going to be C, E, G. The A is not there. So we say our first instinct, based on non-chord tones, would be to analyze it as such. We say it's approached by a step and resolved by a leap in the opposite direction. That is an escape tone. So ET for short. And then we end with the exact same 1 chord as we had in our previous example. So here we see that the 5th of the 5 chord steps up into the 6th of the 5 chord and then resolves down by leap to the tonic, the root of our 1 chord. Now this is good. This is the critical thing to understand. So I'm going to say that part again. The 5th of our 5 chord steps up into the 6th of the 5 chord, and the 6 is not part of the chord, right? So the 6th member of that would apply there, and then resolves down by a leap of a third to the root of the 1 chord. So when we look at our final measure, analyze this, here, 2/6 chord, as expected, same, 1 chord at the end, but here, instead of, we go to C, C, E, A. Now, before this lesson, you might have had a hard time trying to analyze and figure out what that was. So you're looking at a piece of music, you're listening to a symphony, you get to this and you're like, huh, how would I analyze this? Do you really say, well, I got a C, let's make a little space right here. You say, okay, well, I've got a C, another C, an E, and an A. Well, I need to make that into a triad, so that A is the root, A, C, E, A minor triad, in first inversion. Therefore, A minor is the 3 chord, so it's a 3 chord in first inversion. And you might write 2/6, 3/6, 1. Now, friends, harmonic progression. This makes no sense in terms of our harmonic progression. We know that 2 does not go to a 3 chord. We also know that 3 is almost never found in first inversion. The only thing that you might say to me is, Dr. B, but you did say something about parallel first inversion triads. True. But we still, when you see something like this, you should definitely take a moment and think about, are there other options? And this is why we're talking about beyond the basics right now. If you listen to that root movement, it sounds like 2/6, 5/1, which is one of the reasons I also say to always use your ear and listen. Right? Don't fall into the trap of going so far into the music theory to think that the theory comes before the ears. It's the other way around. We use our ears, we listen, we discover what sounds good, what works for the way we hear things and the way sound works. We discover that, and then we look at it and try to say, well, what's the theory behind this? What's the principles, so that we can be a little quicker in figuring out what works and apply it across other examples, other pieces that we might be working with. So this is not a 3/6 chord. It looks like an A minor triad with C in the bass. We could spell it that way. You wouldn't be crazy, but you would be wrong. So what we really have is a 5 chord. And we really would just say C major triad. But we know that we're substituting the 6 for the 5th. And we would analyze that. There's one of 2 ways. One is to simply say that it is just a 5 chord with a non-standard escape tone. Non-standard escape tone. That's why this second example here was important. So here, we have that same shape of step up, leap down. And that just becomes non-standard because the preparation for the non-chord tone happens in the chord beforehand, and the entire duration of the 5 chord is all the non-chord tone. So you really could consider that a non-chord tone. I guess you could circle it and call it an escape tone. You could say ET, like that, and label it as such. So just a 5 chord with a non-standard escape tone. Another way that some music theoreticians analyze it is they say 5, and then they write it as substitution 6th. So 5 subs, S-U-B-S, 6. And there, if you were to do it that way, you wouldn't also analyze it as escape tone. It would be one or the other. So either 5 subs 6, meaning 5 substitute the 6, or 5 chord, circle it, label it as an escape tone, recognizing that it is a non-standard escape tone. All right? So that's essentially what it is. It's not super hard or super crazy, but let's make a couple observations here. This happens in the soprano, in the melody, and it's the only place it happens. It happens up higher, above the rest of the chord, and there's some reasons for that. But melodically, we go from scale degree 2, again, we're in F major, so the G is scale degree 2. We step up to scale degree 3 in our 5 chord, in our dominant, where we're making this substitution, and then we leap down to scale degree 1. And that's what needs to happen, all right? This again, this is the point where we're getting that substitution on scale degree 3, but this is the way we prepare it, and this is the way we resolve it. And it occurs in the upper part, the most upper part, in the melody or the soprano. All right, now that deals with triads, but let's take a closer look at what happens when we deal with a 5-7 chord. Okay, so